What's up, Call of Duty fans? Hope you guys have been enjoying CWL London, at least after day one. I know I absolutely did. A lot of games to be watched, a lot of rosters to be evaluated, and I think we did a pretty decent job of doing that. Before I go into breaking down day one, though, I need to hit on this because I really want to make a video on this, and I will after London, but it's not enough time to make one now. But it's in regard to all of the COD burner things, talking about the franchising for the CWL come 2020. You may have seen things about teams being confirmed, some teams maybe not even getting in at all, and then also things like potentially PC being involved in 2020. I need to tell you this first and foremost. I will touch on these issues in big specifics come after London. You got to keep in mind that these documents that have been leaked are essentially just business proposals sent out to potential prospects for bidders. This is by no means any kind of, this is what the league is going to be, this is what it is no matter what, deal with it, that's all. It's simply a business proposal from Activision MLG to be sent out to these teams. There were a lot of rumors circulating when the Overwatch League was first started when it came to things like player drafts and things of that nature, and most of those things never ended up becoming true because the simple fact of other legal things in place for most of these orgs that will eventually buy into what we anticipate would be the Call of Duty World League in 2020. The whole PC thing, again, just forget about that for now. I'll go in more detail about these things later on after London, but for now you're going to see more of these things likely leaked and talked about. Just know that they're simply proposals. They're not stapled as being, yes, this is going to for sure happen. So don't get jebaited into all that stuff because, again, it is just a business proposal sent out to bidders where eventually the board of directors from all of these orgs will meet up with Activision MLG and they'll come together and try to make terms for what the league should look like. That's exactly how it happened with Overwatch League. The same things were proposed and hardly any of them happened. So don't worry about it. Don't worry like, oh, OpTic's not going to be there. FaZe isn't getting a bid. We don't know any of that for sure, okay? It's all little rumor things. Just let that sit aside. Let's enjoy CWL London. Let's dig into it. I want to start things off by reminding you what our pools look like going into today. Pool A with 100 Thieves, OpTic Gaming, Enigma 6, and Reciprocity. This was my pool of death, simply because I thought that all four teams, based on previous performances and the pickups from Enigma 6, would make them a major contender in this group specifically. Okay, that's simply what it came down to. Reciprocity at home after our top 3 finish. OpTic Gaming having a disappointing top 12 from the previous at Fort Worth, looking to prove themselves, and 100 Thieves kind of setting up a platform and a narrative to potentially go for a championship. Pool B was Luminosity, Splice, Denial, and Gen G. Some people touted this as being their pool of death. I wasn't as convinced simply because I wasn't convinced by Denial's pickups. I thought Luminosity have fallen a little bit, and I thought Gen G was going to storm through this pool because they've looked really strong, and Splice has been good and obviously consistent, so that's always a consideration. But I was not nearly as convinced by Denial as I was in a group like Enigma 6, for instance. We'll talk about that more later. Pool C had E-United, Envy, Evil Geniuses, and FaZe Clan. And again, a very competitive pool. We've seen all three of those aforementioned teams at the very top play up against each other and find limited success against one another. And then, of course, you throw in a wild card of FaZe, who have a lot of experienced players and a lot of, essentially a lot to prove because the org missing out on PLQ, they wanted to make sure that that was essentially a fluke. And then we go to Child's Play in Pool D, where we weren't sure what we were going to get here because of not only all the roster changes, but also the sheer talent in this pool was considerably less than the others. It was still competitive, but maybe not for the sexiest reasons. Let's go ahead and start taking a look at the pools, though. We'll start over at Pool A, and this is the order we'll do it in, starting off with 100 Thieves, as they started their day off with dominating performance and looking prime for that championship run, like we mentioned, as they had absolutely no problems with Reciprocity first, and then Enigma 6 second. But then OpTic would come up at the end of the day, and after OpTic was fueling the fuel versus their previous set versus Reciprocity, they came out hot and gave us a set that we will absolutely remember from CWL London after they would eventually fall at a 1-3 scoreline. The biggest thing about this team is the simple fact that Priesta is an absolute animal. There's no other doubt about it. Another way to say it, Priesta is insane. And here's the thing. Enable got memed on a little bit for having a very vastly negative scoreboard, KD on the scoreboard rather, but he still ended up pulling out a positive and relatively high EKIA number on the final tally scoreboard. So even though Enable may have been getting the short end of the stick when it came to him entry fragging, it just goes to show that the teamwork of this squad is at another level, typically speaking. Someone has to be the entry fragger, and generally that person will only find one trade, if that, but opens up the point for retakes or the bomb sites for full takes and things like that. And Enable is typically the guy to do that, and he has been throughout most of this game. The loss to OG definitely hurts, but it might not be as bad as it seems, especially when you look at it from Enable's perspective. He still popped off and got kind of memed on a little for popping off, but hey, simple fact of the matter is, he actually did his job, and 100 Thieves was able to capitalize off of it. So that's really, really big as you go forward. OpTic Gaming would be up next on our little list here. And again, they had that win versus OpTic, or pardon me, that versus 100 Thieves that we came to know at the end of the day. But the start was a little bit different, a little shaky for the green wall. And now I had my expectations pretty high coming out for Enigma 6, specifically against OpTic Gaming. But to be candid, OpTic really only escaped from what would have been a 4-map loss if it weren't for some heroic plays at the back end of round 5 on the control on Arsenal. I know some OpTic fans won't like me to hear that, but here's the simple fact of the matter. They would bounce back and absolutely destroy Reciprocity in the back end of Dashy, having some absolutely unhuman moments with not only the scope, but also the Maddox alike, and similar scenes would be taking place in that set versus 100 Thieves. Even with Crimsic struggling throughout some moments in those games, TJ and Scump also stepped up. Karma had his 3-time champ MVP moments, and Dashy, of course, being the Bruce that he is, was looking absolutely dominating. The biggest thing is that TJ and Scump look better than they did at Fort Worth, and that's absolutely huge for OpTic that are making strides to start to get back to that dominating form that they were back at Vegas. But it was definitely most evident that that was the case versus 100 Thieves. The perfect 3-0 was definitely not expected by my mind, but it was definitely a pleasant surprise. You see the scores there, the 3-1 versus 100T, the 3-2 versus Enigma 6, and the 3-0 versus Reciprocity. Going over to Enigma 6, again, I told you to watch out for this team. And I hate to say I told you so, but this team was only a couple of kills away from that round 5, from going 2-1 in this pool and being in the winner's bracket, having defeated OpTic Gaming and then Reciprocity. However, that would not be the case, obviously, as Enigma 6 would not be able to get things done. The biggest thing about this squad with these roster changes is General was absolutely clutch with the ICR from time to time, and when Enigma 6 wanted to get aggressive up front, the Sog and Maddox line handled their business as they should have. The 2-3 that they kind of had versus OpTic Gaming showed that Kismet and Jet Li were able to work out Scump and TJ pretty early on before Jet Li started to really kind of slow down in that control, and then beyond that. Jet Li had a little bit of a rough day. Frosty had incredible moments with the scope. GodRx came in huge with a number of multi-kills later in the day. It just came down to Jet Li missing out on a couple of opportunities, and that's where I want to see these guys improve as they go. That last game, though, versus Reciprocity was a must-win for both teams. But Enigma 6 just looked like too much of a team for Reciprocity to handle. And I think that should say something, because yes, Reciprocity goes 0-3 today. Spoiler alert, because it's not on screen. I think it wasn't because Reciprocity looked bad, just that everybody else in this pool looked better. Flat out. Speaking of Reciprocity, what the hell happened with this team that we fell in love with at Fort Worth? Able to find a number of escaping wins versus a lot of teams. These guys went map 5 with almost everybody throughout pools and their bracket. But a lot apparently has changed from where their form was a month ago. Now, again, I said that they didn't look terrible, but Dylan was definitely not popping off as much as he was at Fort Worth. Neither was Tommy. There were some interesting moments where Shawnee was actually forced to pick up a KN versus 100 Thieves because 100 Thieves on Frequency Hardpoint was running double AR setups, forcing Reciprocity to change their pacing. But it was exactly that throughout the entire day. Reciprocity kept having to change their play style, and they never really felt like they set up their own pace. That's something that I really need them to see change when they go into the losers bracket tomorrow, and I think they could put together a pretty magical run, kind of similar almost to how Heretic did after they started off 0-3 in their pool play at Fort Worth, and then were able to piece together a couple of wins in the losers bracket before they eventually fell. I still think Reciprocity can make a run, but they need to set up their own pace and play at their own kind of control and tempo. Otherwise, this home crowd will be going home and potentially seeing their fan favorite EU squad going home in the first round of the losers bracket, not winning a single set. That would be an interesting look. Here's a look back at what that pool standing would be. Of course, OpTic Gaming and 100 Thieves make it into the winners bracket. Enigma 6 just outside, and Reciprocity not doing much better. Switching over to Pool B, though, again, this was the pool that some had touted as being the pool of death. I was not nearly as convinced, simply because I was a big believer in Gen G, and I saw that would be Luminosity and Splice fighting for potentially that second winners bracket spot. Gen G somehow managed to still get away after going 3-0, as you see it pop up on your screen, very convincing for them, still flying underneath the radar. and I have no idea really how. They managed to come out of the gate and smoke Luminosity 3-0, really only getting nervous in the 6-5 search and destroy that existed there, and then they breezed by Splice with only a small hindrance in the control. That was a 3-2 there, and then finished off with the dismantling of that newer Denial squad, who was hanging on for dear life. With the exception of the 5-6 S&D slip-up, it was still all Gen G. The team flat out just looks like they're in championship form due to how easily they handed LG early, but more importantly, they came out and handled what looked to be a very hot Splice team as well. There wasn't much concern throughout the entirety of the day for Gen G. They looked really, really good. But let's jump down to Splice, because again, we mentioned Splice started off very hot. That was versus the new Denial squad, and they had no problem destroying them and letting the audience know while it was happening. They were all over the place, loud vocals, and yeah, we'll just kind of leave that where it was. If you missed it, you can go back and hear Jordan Temp kind of popping off a little bit. The set versus Gen G was a very different one, though, before they were able to come back and effectively knock out LG with relative ease. Wow, that's tough to say fast. Even though they lost the first hardpoint based on a time limit. Only got to 233 for LG, I think it was 226 for Splice, but that was the first time I think we've seen a time limit be reached in hardpoint. That was on Hacienda, and then Splice would take over from there. Luminosity, well, how the mighty have fallen. Not a great day from Luminosity. It wasn't just the fact that they started off slow versus Gen G, but how about this Game 5? Unacceptably, I would say, losing to Denial in that Game 5, and then getting smoked even harder by Splice. Formal started slow, Slacked had some wonky moments, but generally there was nobody who really came out and played consistent at all for Luminosity. And I hate to say it, but are we possibly living in a world where no Rampart, no LG exists? Because honestly, it sure does feel like that after their 2-2 cross division, now to this, a 3-9 map win-loss record. Something needs to change. I don't know if it needs to be more AR setups or if they need to find a way to get the SOGs more online, but it needs to change, and it needs to change fast, because this is not the LG we saw throughout any portion, really, of Fort Worth, and they're going to be in trouble moving through that losers bracket. And then the Denial. Again, I was in denial about this team in my power rankings. Most of you gave me some flack about it, and I will admit I stand somewhat corrected. Somewhat. Brack has had some absolutely insane moments, and that's been the case throughout the entirety of this game, and he absolutely shined in the moments where Denial ended up on top of their competition. But the bad side for Denial was Alex had a bit of an identity crisis, switching between every single weapon in the game at different points, depending on the map or mode combination, which left Denial a little bit lost in their coordination across longer respawn type modes. And you would hope to see them improve just simply in finding some consistency of what you're using and how you slay with it, as they will be coming into the losers bracket. The constant changing of weapons really felt like it kept Denial from getting on the same page at times, and it really felt like it hurt them specifically in the respawn of the hardpoint and control modes, as they did not tote the best win-loss record there at all, but had a pretty decent search and destroy throughout the rest of the day. So as you take a look back at what those standings look like, again, Gen G 3-0, Splice 2-1, Denial at 1-2, and then the big surprise is Luminosity at 0-3. Insane. They will be dropping down to the losers bracket, while Gen G and Splice will be up in the winners bracket. Let's jump on over to Pool C. And again, this was an interesting pool simply because there's a variety of teams here, everyone having their own strengths and weaknesses versus other specific teams in the pool. Essentially, how history had it, it was NV was better than E United, E United was better than Evil Geniuses, but Evil Geniuses was better than Envy. So there's a little circle going on between our top three teams, and FaZe kind of fit in this time around as the wild card with their new roster. We'll start with E United first. They started their day versus Envy, but it's hard to really say their day started versus Envy, considering that Clayster was a little shaky and even admitted on Twitter that he was having some hand twitch issues. He didn't really feel comfortable throughout the entirety of the set. And to be honest, the only person who looked to be awake in that first set was Simp, who had an incredible and masterful day, as Envy would actually take the opening set 3-1 before E United would bounce back and take care of both FaZe as well as Evil Geniuses. And wow. The biggest thing was that EU just turned everything back on versus FaZe. It was a super close battle versus the new FaZe team, where it really felt like it kind of came down to opening kills, whether they be on entry or rotations or holds, depending on the map mode. But each of the hard points were relatively one-sided, and then EU would roll in the S&D simply behind Simp's absolutely nutty gameplay all day long. They would finish off relatively easy versus Evil Geniuses, even though they started off with a small scare in map 1, as they took a 227-250 loss in the hard point. But Simp is an absolute monster and had carried this team through the majority of the day. The sniper gameplay is nuts in Search and Destroy, but beyond that, he's able to kind of pick up weapons on the ground and utilize every weapon in the game at a very high level. Simp has made this squad extremely scary, specifically in Search and Destroy, which is something... When was the last time we said United had consistent and scary Search and Destroy? It's been a while, that's for sure. We'll jump down to FaZe Clan very quickly, and I'll admit I had questions about this FaZe team, and I mentioned that not only in my roster videos, but also in my power rankings. And most of my questions were answered today as FaZe showed that with some time, this team could be really special. But that's kind of the problem. It's with some time. There were moments of some questionable calls and lack of coordination versus both Evil Geniuses, but also against EU. But more importantly is that they looked much more complete versus Envy in their 3-1 route of this other kind of newer roster in the pool. Zuma looked pretty solid throughout the entirety of the day. Zero had some good moments with the ICR. And to be honest, Asim looked pretty okay as well, even though we had some questions about him considering that most of his good stats had came against other open division teams or semi-pro teams that didn't make it to the Pro League. He had some great moments and some bad moments. Everyone seemed to be playing on the same level though, and that's what you want to see from FaZe. If they can kind of bone up and buff out some of these issues in their coordination and some of the respawn things, this could be a very solid team in the future. My hopes are not super high for them. They will be the other team in the winner's bracket though, as you see them, they go 2-1 there. Team Envy next. Like we started versus, talking about United, they looked very good and super clean versus United, but then they seemed to struggle immensely versus Evil Geniuses, and they immediately looked pretty distraught and sloppy in many moments in the Search and Destroy and hardpoints past that. They would find some echoes of elements of both their first games versus FaZe, but they never really fully recovered, and they missed out on a top 2 spot because of that. Again, they go 1-3 versus not only FaZe, but also Evil Geniuses. And that's tough to see. The good news for this squad is Decimate and Huke together look absolutely unstoppable at times, but Pharaoh had some questions and he looked just okay throughout the majority of the day, and there were some awkward moments from Aches as well that you don't want to see happen. If this Envy team wants to have success, they cannot just get duo carried by Decimate and Huke, and that's what it looked like throughout most of that set versus the United, and what was kind of lacking in the sets versus FaZe and Evil Geniuses past that. We'll finish off with Evil Geniuses, and yes, this team, they came out fighting, and that's about all we can say about them. They had a pretty solid start, but like was mentioned with FaZe, there were some gaping moments where it was just blind floods into hills or points with not much setup preparation. But the biggest thing is that this team is decidedly better than what it was before, and they showed growth throughout the Envy set specifically, but that was almost immediately countered by E United, who was hungry for a winner's bracket spot, where they missed the chance again at a winner's bracket. This whole pool was 1-1 at one point in time going into their third map, so everybody was on a win and get in situation, just came into what position. You'll take a look at the pools. This is how it would pan out with the tiebreakers. E United would be able to be over FaZe Clan, and then Evil Geniuses would rock the third spot, as Team Envy will be following up in the fourth. We'll round things out very quickly here in Pool D before we take a look at the brackets quickly. Pool D was a mess. I'll just say that much. And, well, I don't even know where to start. I guess we'll start with Midnight because they're at the top. This was one of the two teams that relatively stayed consistent roster-wise in the pool. But it sure didn't look like it. Again, they went 2-2 in the cross division and were showing moments of brilliance. Didn't look like any of that progress continued during their time between the cross div and here. Their first match versus Elevate was an absolute cluster. It was a disaster. They came out ice cold, getting turned on left and right by Elevate, and they started off with a 99 to 250 hardpoint, and it was almost at one point it was like 220 to like 30 something. It was really bad for a moment there for Midnight. The S&D wasn't any better. There were tech issues, but they ended up losing that one 0-6. And then they finally started showing signs of life as they came back near the end of the Elevate set. They were able to come through UYU in that 5-game set before they would eventually fall to Heretics at a pretty convincing fashion. Heretics looked really, really good throughout this. But this Midnight team is a mess. Nobody seemed to be playing all that well, and you got to find a way to clean things up. If they come out ice cold tomorrow, just chalk it up. I just don't see this team going very far. Heretics, like I predicted, they would go 3-0 in pools, and, well, they would. Pretty easily, honestly, and to be honest, it was more of a gift than we may have anticipated because, again, Midnight didn't look nearly all that great. UYU seemed pretty weak throughout, and Elevate still has a lot of questions as far as what is this team really going to offer as far as competitive value. Heretics would have no sweat throughout the entire day and farm this pool relatively easily. They only dropped one map, and that was a 3-6 loss in Search and Destroy to Midnight, so you know, some considerations to go back and look at, but the biggest thing about this team for Heretics is that they never were sweating during a hard point or a control. They were clean, polished in the respawn, and that's what you want to see going through into a championship bracket. UYU, their next team up, the team still struggles up front. You switch out and you get Royalty in the mix, and honestly, it doesn't do much better than what you had before. And really up front is where they lost most of their games. That's how they lost it versus Midnight, in my opinion. Proto and Royalty did not really hold their end of the bargain when it came down to putting a lot of pressure on the team. So really just came down to Mayhem, Methods, and Parzelian trying to clean up that trio, and they just simply couldn't carry. Fortunately, UYU did avoid the map 5 at the end of the day versus Elevate, but the set was relatively sloppy, and really it was kind of hard to watch, to be honest with you. There were a lot of just blind rushes, hoping that you're mechanically better than your opponents, something you don't want to see from UYU, which at this point in time is mostly built of experienced players, at least for this season. The biggest thing about this team going forward is you have some moments of hope, as they were close to closing out some search and destroys. Most of them were 5-6 losses that they had, which is hopeful, as their control also actually looked relatively decent throughout the day. But again, lots of coordination needs to happen to get this SOG line back in line to what the Maddoxes and the ICR want to do, because honestly, there were a lot of gaping moments as far as how they were approaching hills. And just points in general throughout the entirety of the day. Finishing things off, Elevate. Again, lots of you got on me about Skies and me kind of throwing him under the bus. Okay, here's the thing. Skies has had some good moments in the past. Today, he actually had some great moments. Like, incredible moments throughout some maps in day one. Looked insane in some of these maps today. But the bad thing is, the next map, he almost wouldn't show up at all. Barely you saw him in the kill feed, really whatsoever. That is something that, if you're going to build a team around somebody, needs to change. You need to find somebody who can be consistent in that Maddox flex role. Whalers and Brizzy had the same inconsistent issues that they had when they were playing on Denial previously, and it just came down to clear coordination issues between the French players and now what is the core of the Elevate roster, which naturally is mostly North American speaking. Profizi had some good moments. There were some good moments from everybody on the team. It just comes down to they need to find a way to get consistent. They miss out versus UYU, which was a little bit heartbreaking after seeing them do so well versus Midnight. They obviously didn't really get much of a chance to go up against Heretics because Heretics is in a different level. But really, flat out, I think this team could be decent, but there wasn't anything in their gameplay today that convinced me that they would be much more better than where I previously had them in my rankings. It's going to have to take a pretty miracle run for them to get through the losers bracket. Here is how that pool panned out. Heretics up top. UYU will get the 1 and 2 kind of squeak into winners bracket. Thankful for them. And then Elevate and Midnight would be dropped down. Elevate, if they would have won that map for Hardpoint, not only would they have paid out on a bet that I put down, but they also would have gotten into the winners bracket with a 4th map win there, which they were not able to provide. And Midnight would be at the bottom. So again, top 2 from each pool would go to the winners bracket. Bottom 2 will go to the losers bracket. Let's take a look at our winners bracket first. And some of these matchups look a little scary, and it's going to be interesting to see. OpTic Gaming will go up against FaZe Clan first. Heretics and Splice just below that. United and 100 Thieves. This was the matchup from losers bracket round 1 in Fort Worth. Now it's happening in winners bracket round 1. At least there's some breathing room knowing that your tournament's not over after that matchup for either of those teams. And then Gen G will go up against UYU. Honestly, I think most of these games are going to be pretty one-sided. I've got OpTic Gaming taking FaZe, really not much of a problem. OpTic is doing really, really well. They're 3-0 in control, by the way. That's absolutely huge for OpTic, who previously couldn't win a control in the cross-divisional at all. So mostly the ship is steering straight for them, and they should find some success against FaZe Clan, who is a team that, again, has been looking good. They went 3-0 in control as well, which is good, and they had some success in Hardpoint. I would love to see their S&D improve, though. They're going to have a shot against OpTic. Heretics and Splice, well, I mean, Heretics, there wasn't really much of a litmus test for them. For Splice, though, there have been moments of greatness from Splice, and I think they will have some pretty easy moments versus Heretics, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Heretics fight back in this matchup. This is actually, to be honest with you guys, as I was building the graphics, this is one of the first times I've actually looked at this winners and losers bracket matchup, so I'm kind of getting full reactions from here as well. The thing about the Splice team is if they can start off hot and clicking together, there's not going to be much to slow them down. The problem comes to when they start slow and have to get that ball rolling in a forward motion at a slower rate. Then it usually comes down to, will they get their form in time? Heretics could be a team to give them some issues. United and 100 Thieves, I think 100 Thieves is still a major runner when it comes down to their championship run. They're 5-1 in hardpoint, with only one loss being at a 230 to 250. But oddly, they're 1-2 in both search and destroy and control. So if you're E United, you're hoping that the search and destroy will provide some success for you to elongate this set and give you more of a chance to kind of get adjusted and tune into this very hot 100 Thieves team. And then UYU and Gen G, don't worry, that's going to be a 3-0. Let's go over to the champs losers bracket, where Evil Geniuses will play Reciprocity, Denial will play Midnight, Enigma 6 and Envy should be an interesting one, and then Elevate and Luminosity. The biggest thing here is if you're Reciprocity, you're feeling pretty fortunate that you get Evil Geniuses. This is a team that has been kind of struggling a little bit. They haven't won a single point in control yet, which is good for Reciprocity because they're also pretty atrocious in the control themselves. So you're hoping that for Reciprocity, they need to come in with that central mindset, come out hot, how they're going to approach the losers bracket, because they could put together a pretty special run. You would not want to see them go home at top 16, losing every single match they played on home turf. Denial and Midnight, all bets are off here, honestly. I think you have to give this one simply to Denial because Midnight has looked all over the place, but this Denial team did not win a single hard point and instead relied on their search and destroy where they went 3-1. That needs to change. If this team can't get moving on the same cylinders in the respawn mode, you can't honestly see this team going very far beyond maybe Midnight, who again has had their own issues. It's a mess, I won't lie, with Midnight. The time off didn't merit much improvement from their 2-2 across div. And if they come out cold tomorrow, just chalk it up to Denial. Enigma 6 and Envy, I think, will be a really competitive game. It's kind of a shame this is happening so soon. I still think Enigma 6 is a team to watch out for. It would be really bad to see Team Envy come out as a top 16 performance, but again, I feel like that Envy team is mostly relying on Decimate and Huke to carry them through. The biggest surprise of the Enigma 6 is how surprising this team has been in Search and Destroy. They're 3-1, averaging a 5-3 round count there. So that's really, really good, to be completely honest. It's one of the best throughout day number 1. But there are worries in the consistency from Jet Li when it comes to the respawn, and that's going to be the biggest matchup problem, I think, as Envy has been really good with their consistency. Typically, it just comes down to will Jekyll or Hyde show up tomorrow for Envy. And then Elevate and Luminosity. This is where Luminosity starts to make their run to kind of redeem themselves, kind of like how Heretics did. I don't see them having a trouble at all with Elevate, just based on previous experience and veteranship alone. So that's how things will be going with the pools. This was a long video. I apologize. I hope you enjoyed it, though. I'll try to trim it down for you guys and keep the other ones a little bit shorter, but I wanted to go on my little rant about everything going on with the COD burner stuff. I'll do a video more specifically on that. And again, if you see videos or streams rather on Charlie and Delta that you want casted, I will be going back and casting a handful of those and putting them up on the channel as well. So if you want those kind of updates and content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to get notifications on when videos do pop live. Until tomorrow, we'll catch you then. Hope you keep pulling it down. Later, bye-bye.